my god, why is my hair so gigantic? Sorry, Twitter is not working today.
There we go.
Anyway, hi Andrew, welcome to Venture with Grace.
Yeah, hi Grace. Thanks for having me on today.
Okay, so to start the show, why don't we start with HumanX? What brought you to HumanX?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's where everyone is. It seems
Yeah.
like my team first flagged it to me. I was like, "Huh? I've never heard of this. What is it?" And they were
Is
like,
this
"It
like
is
the first year? Or
It's
no?
the first year, is my understanding.
Okay.
Yeah, the hotel apparently is brand new. It's only
Yeah,
like
the
a
hotel
year
was
old.
last year too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's clearly it's new, but obviously AI has taken over the world,
Yeah.
and it seems to be the hot new AI conference.
Exactly. To be honest, I feel like this is basically the VC / founder or tech Olympic. So this is crazy.
Totally, everyone's here.
Everyone's here. Yeah. Okay. So to start show, I want the audience to learn more about you. So before you sold a company, who were you and what were some core lessons that you've learned back in time?
Sure. So, background on me: I'm originally from South Carolina. Went to Duke, big Duke basketball fan. Go Blue Devils. Growing up, I was a smart kid and I was into games and like spending time online. But frankly, like especially being from South Carolina, I don't think I really knew even what Stanford was. I had never really heard of venture capital. It was just a foreign concept to me. And I got really inspired. I was in college when the iPhone came out, by basically everything that the hardware of the iPhone could do that no one had built the software for yet. And so started sort of taking the classes on iTunes in my free time, eventually switched into comp sci and basically became a, kind of 1 foot in engineering, 1 foot in product person from there. Really my whole career has been basically getting annoyed about things in the world that should be simpler and easier and going and building, products and now businesses to solve those problems.
Okay, so the first problem you solved was you created like the Netflix for books.
Yep.
Why don't we talk about that? Like, what was that? And then, like, I know it's for ebooks, and obviously, and then you guys got acquired. Why don't we talk about what were the product you were building, and then why were you building it, and then how did you kind of like arrive at that?
Yeah, totally. So, let's go back in time. So this was 2012. So if you put yourself kind of in that moment in time, Spotify had only been in the US for about a year, which is crazy to think about. Prior to that, it was still, buying songs for 99 cents on iTunes. So Spotify was relatively new here. Netflix was growing, but was still, honestly, at that point, I bet their DVD business was like similar to bigger than their streaming business. Like they were just starting about trying to spin off the DVD business. And basically we saw what had happened in music and in movies and TV. I've always been a huge nerd and a big reader. And I loved going to the library as a kid. That was great. But I hated the library experience. Like basically online, they had these like terrible ebook apps that you would go and want to get something and it would be like reserved for the next few weeks. So this is dumb. Like you need to be able to just pay, 10, 15 bucks a month, whatever it might be, similar to Spotify and Netflix, and have access to basically any book in the world that you might want to read. So basically that was the core vision. It was really like that simple. That was the product experience that we wanted to go out and create. And so we then from basically, I guess it was about 3.5 years, 2012 to 2015, went and built that app, built an amazing reading experience. And by far,
so how were you connecting to the publishers and everything?
So that's a good question. I was about to say that was by far the hardest part. You would imagine in this business, and I'm based in New York, and that's where my two co-founders were as well. And we liked the idea of building a business in New York that was like meant to be in New York, which like all the publishers are there. Like it made a lot of sense. And so frankly, what we had to do was a lot of pounding the pavement and a lot of proving ourselves to them. So, one of our first 2 hires was someone who had been in the publishing industry forever and really like knew the space and had the trust of the people there. And I think it was the combination of that, being there in person with them. And one of my other co-founders, Willem, is an incredible designer. And so we were like 2 months old and had a, Fortune 100 style brand, basically. And I think the combination of those things let them feel like we were speaking their language in a way that made them trust us. And then simultaneous to that, frankly, at the time they were, to some degree still are, but especially then, were really afraid of Amazon. And I think they were looking for kind of any counterweight they could come up with there.
So, what was the competition like with Amazon? So obviously, like you guys got acquired, which is like amazing. But tell me more about what do you see was like the biggest fear on the competition? Obviously, they have a lot of like budget and everything, but still, I still feel like it was fairly new back then to create something like this.
Totally.
And what was like the biggest challenge, and then what did make you decided to now go for it?
Yeah, totally. And sell the company. Yeah,
Yeah.
we were definitely early on in the space. And when you
Mhm.
think about it, then, Kindle itself was probably 3 or 4 years old at that point in
Mhm.
terms of the physical device. iBooks,
Mhm.
it was maybe 2 years old or
Mhm.
something like that. So this was all kind of happening, back then the digital media
Mhm.
stuff was kind of where like AI is now in terms of
Mhm.
being newer and everything going on.
Mhm.
And so at that moment in time, really there were no, when we got started, subscription services for
Mhm.
ebooks on the market.
Mhm.
Ebooks were also on this crazy growth curve where it
Mhm.
really wasn't clear basically how big the physical book market was going to continue to
Mhm.
be versus if the ebook market was going to almost totally subsume it.
Mhm.
Ultimately, what happened there, well, first, I learned so much about business models running that
Mhm.
business. We were in a really tough spot because on the one hand, you had like 4 publishers that
Mhm.
basically controlled all of the supply of our books.
Mhm.
And then on the other hand, you had, this dominant competitor in Amazon on the
Mhm.
ebook side that had the vast majority of market share. And then on top of that, it turns out ebooks basically just as a whole category stagnated and didn't really grow anymore. And actually
Mhm.
physical books over the
Mhm.
last like 10 years have grown their share in the market.
Mhm.
So I think it was the combination of those factors that led us to realize, okay, you're sort of playing in a small pond here. We've built a great app. We've gotten the publishers, we had half of the largest publishers, giving us their books, more than 1 million titles in the catalog. But we really felt like we had basically taken it as far as we could go.
Mhm.
It wasn't going to, we didn't see the breakout path basically to being,
Mhm.
the tens of billions of dollars type business that Spotify, and Netflix have
What was
built.
the
Yeah.
business model? Was it like subscription or
Yeah, it was all
what was it?
subscription. So it
Yeah.
was $10 a month to us.
Mhm.
And then we would pay the publishers based on the books that you read.
Got it. And then like for publishers, like do they get like, let's say, I don't know, 50 cents whenever someone download, or is this more of like you have to pay the original licensing, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, basically they would get paid
Royalties, I think.
a royalty if you read more than a certain like amount of the book, like more
Got
than the
it.
sample effectively. But it did, and this was like certainly one of the big learnings. It led to a spot where for our heaviest readers, we were
Mhm.
losing money on them, which is a tough spot to be in, right? Like
Yeah, you
want to
want
be
them to read,
you want to be
but
aligned with
yeah.
your best users, and when your business model is misaligned with that, I think it's really tough.
Yeah.
And we weren't. It's not like we were dumb. We weren't blind to that, but the publishers just would not play ball
Mhm.
in any other model. I think, frankly, at the end of the day, the publishers were pretty old school,
Mhm.
and would prefer if everything was just physical books and local bookstores and libraries the way it has always been,
Mhm.
and for good reason. I think it was like totally like I understand it from their perspective, but yeah, it made it a tough spot to try and compete.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I feel you. But like now, that's like really different from, embedded payment.
Payroll, yeah, totally.
Payroll.
Yeah.
Okay, why don't we start with like, what were like the core lessons that you took from the first business to like the second business, and then tell us everything about Check.
For sure, yeah, and they are super different spaces, but
Mhm.
there is very much a common through line between them. So, if I really let's sort of wrap on the Oyster thread first. Like, what did I take away from Oyster?
Mhm.
I learned how to not only build a startup, but
Mhm.
build amazing software. Like our
Mhm.
users loved the product that we had built, and it was
Mhm.
consumer software. We got a lot of attention, I think, at the time for the quality of our design, the
Mhm.
quality of the experience we built. Like we did awesome things. Like we did a partnership with J.K. Rowling and the Harry Potter
Oh
folks.
wow.
Like
Okay.
they wouldn't work with like Google and the other big guys, but they like.
Wait, how do you reach out to J.K. Rowling?
This is the partnership. So, they've got a Pottermore, I think is the name of it. And you reach out to them, you're like, hey, we're doing this. Like, we'd love to do a partnership with your books. And at first they were skeptical, and then they really sat down and listened to us. And so we did this whole, and they were, I think they like putting their content in places where it will be elevated. And so that's what we did. So we did little experiences in the app. Like, okay, you go to open your first, Harry Potter book and you get a like sorting hat and you can like do things and it like, picks your house and, whatever it was, things to like really make it feel special, which I think they like. But that's just a broader example of like, I learned how to build, not only software, but also teams to build great software and a culture of people working together. At the time we were all in New York and like all in the office. We're like 25, and And that was awesome. And so that's really, I think, the through line of what I took into check was I'm a software guy at the end of the day. I knew that I wanted to build a software business, not a media business. And I knew that I was really good at that. And I also knew that I didn't want to put myself in a spot where, you feel like, okay, you spend a couple of years and you've kind of built most of the product surface area. I wanted to be in a position where I felt like we had decades of work to do to build what was needed. And so that doesn't describe any one particular space. Like that could describe a lot of things, but that was sort of the shape of the problem I was looking for. More B2B. I kind of wanted out of consumer, and I wanted something where it also was a really big market where there was no one dominant player. Which really brings us to check, and to payroll. So for those who are sort of further away from it, like, first of all, let's just define payroll. Obviously, that's getting your paycheck, every week or every couple of weeks, especially for W-2 employees. That whole space really exists because of taxes, right? Like the government, your state, I live in New York City, the city.
Your favorite month is about to come. Expense.
Yeah, April, exactly, totally. Well, honestly, the last couple of months are even bigger for payroll because we have to generate all the the W-4 form you get, or W-2s rather, with all your personal tax info so that you can go file it. That's all us. Like that's what we're creating and
like that. You're like, that's all us.
Yeah, totally. That's what we do. And so it's one of these. It's pretty. Paul Graham has like the classic schlep business phrase. Payroll is a pretty classic schlep business. Like it is stuff that everyone has to do. Like every business has to do it. They have to pay their employees, and no one wants to think about it, right? It's basically a time tax from the government, and you're just trying to make that simpler and easier. And so when we looked at this market, what I looked at was there are companies with hundreds of billions of dollars of market cap in the public markets out there. The biggest one is ADP, but it still only has like 15% market share. Everyone else is less than that. So super fragmented market. And frankly, the big companies, like the product experiences were just bad. As a technologist and someone that was like coming up through the ranks, I just looked at this and I said, like, it's got to be easier. Like we can build something better here. And so that's what we set out to do for Check. And specifically, just to describe it, Check isn't just another payroll company like an ADP or a Paychex or whoever. We're specifically an infrastructure platform that enables other software companies to build new payroll products and services. So just to give you an example, let's say you run a platform like a Square or a Shopify or someone like that. You would work with us to enable all of the SMB merchants that you work with to get payroll directly through your service. So it's all about being able to bundle it together, not have to go somewhere else and have it in the place that you're used to getting it.
Okay, so I have a question. So if I'm I guess if I'm your client, so like do I have to do you give me the API and then I plug in and then like do the customization myself, or like how does it work with Check?
You're on the right track. So that's the right direction. So it's not we're not giving you kind of a whole application and you're just putting your logo on it. We're giving you the APIs and the embeddable components and everything to put it directly in your product.
Got it. And then what's the comparison between that and then all these like other, I guess, payroll softwares on its own?
Yeah. So the comparison there would be, let's say you're ADP. As a small business owner, you would go and sign up for ADP to have them run your payroll for you. You would never come work with Check to have us run your payroll directly. On the flip side is if you're running a software platform, let's say, vertical SaaS is all the rage these days and vertical AI. If you're running one of those platforms, you would work with us to enable you to launch a payroll product that all of your customers can sign up for. That's the difference. So we're one layer deeper in the stack. I think the sort of thing people are most familiar with is probably payments. So think of us kind of like Stripe. Like you go and use Lyft or Uber or whatnot. You don't really know what payment service they're using on the background to power that. Like you're just riding in the car. It's kind of the same for us. Like we enable folks, in this case, not to launch new payments experiences, but to launch new payroll experiences.
I guess like what would be the crucial experience for payroll?
Like why do people need it and how do they make it better?
No, like I guess like how do you I guess like besides like let's say I want the payroll to pay on time.
Yeah.
And then what are other things along that line that you feel like people are looking for? for?
Yeah.
I know this may sound like such a stupid question.
No,
Payroll
totally.
experts,
Again,
but-
it's because people totally don't want to think about it. I think that's really the key thing, and that's everyone, frankly, myself included.
Also, like, why did you decide to do this? This is very different than like the textbook thing.
Yeah, we found the opportunity through one of our earliest customers. It's a company called Homebase, and they are a software platform that does basically like time tracking and team management for like local Main Street businesses. So think coffee shops and the restaurant on Main Street, locally owned places. And what they had was they had this terrible problem where they had all the time that people had worked for their hourly workers, and were trying to export that in spreadsheets to take it over to like the legacy payroll providers. And it was just a mess. The customers hated it. They wanted simple, straightforward software. Like they just wanted a button. They didn't want like an export spreadsheet button. They wanted a run payroll button that just paid their team. And that, it turns out, is really hard to build, which is where Check comes in.
Why is this so hard to build?
Totally. That's the critical bit. So like just connecting the dots. What do people want? They want simplicity.
Right.
They want just a button that can click run payroll and it pays their team. And by the way, that then on the back end, all of their taxes are filed correctly and automatically. All those forms are made available to them very simply. Yeah.
Yeah. Wait, so like are the primary like companies, they all build this in-house, or like do they, obviously they use a service like yourself, but how do you think about like, why do I feel like I guess like especially the big tech, they want to build everything in-house? Like what would be the disadvantage to build something in-house versus using you guys?
So this is where we come in. It's very unusual to build payroll in-house because it's so complex. And the reason for that is, again, I come back to earlier, I mentioned payroll's a tax business. The 50 state nature of this country in terms of our like federalist state-based system makes it incredibly complicated. So you not only have the IRS rules, you have the rules at every state, and then you also have local rules. So in Pennsylvania, for example, every school district has its own payroll tax. So you have literally thousands of different jurisdictions.
But why?
Just that's how they fund the schools.
Oh, okay.
Some places fund them via property taxes. In this case, they fund them via payroll taxes.
Okay.
That's the thing. These things, like, sometimes they don't make sense, but a lot of times they do. Like when you pull it back, like there's a reason for it. Like, most of these governments are not dumb, but it does make it really hard as a software platform to go out and figure out, like, what are all the jurisdictions? What are all the rules? How do these things fit together? How do we really figure out the money movement? You often need to be a licensed money transmitter. There's just a lot to it. And when you compare what's required to build that versus what's required to build sort of a typical SaaS company, they're pretty divergent in terms of the skill sets. And so that's where Check comes in. Check takes all of that complexity and abstracts it away behind our APIs, behind our components, so that as a customer, like, and a partner of ours, you can focus on the needs of your users and making things simple for them while we handle that back-end complexity.
I wonder, so how are you thinking about, I guess, like, tell us more about, like, so for example, I know that I guess, like, any tech company could be the client. So, like, how do they started working with you guys?
Yeah.
What is that journey?
And I think it might be helpful for me to just give you a sense of like size and scale, so that you understand kind of the customers that we're talking about. So Check works with about 75 software platforms today. Collectively, those platforms power millions of small businesses and tens of millions of workers out there. Last year, we moved about $4 billion on behalf of those platforms. So the way we work with them is typically what's going to happen is, like, we don't want to talk you into building payroll for your customers. Like, this is a need that they need to have, and that you need to feel like you have a differentiated way to go solve for them. If you have that, that's then where our conversation becomes interesting. And we say, hey, we can make this so much easier for you and actually make it possible where it wasn't before for you to solve this need for your customer. So typically we'll, have a sales cycle, educate them about how to do payroll, and then we start our partnership. And we very specifically call them partners, not customers, because we work very closely together to help guide them through building out the product, launching, and beginning to scale it. So yeah, it's a close collaboration across not just a technical work stream, but go to market and kind of support in operations too.
I wonder, so among the 75 tech organizations, like I guess like you like since you mentioned about like the size of the transaction goes onto it, how do you find the perfect clients? So like since you built the product and you mentioned like home base was the first client, like how do you identify this problem is like a repeatable problem, and then what type of client do you identify as the most like perfect user?
Totally. It's a lot of trial and error over time for sure. There are really three customer segments that we found payroll is most important for. Probably the most common type is vertical SaaS businesses. So, you're serving auto mechanics, or you're serving auto dealers, or you're serving plumbers and electricians, whatever it might be. And we work with folks like CCC and Techion and House Call Pro in each of those areas, and they want to solve the payroll problem for their customer base. So that's the most common type. Second most common is what I think of as workforce management providers. So you're doing scheduling or time tracking or onboarding or some sort of HR management, but you don't do payroll today. That's where we come in as well. And then the final group is basically financial management tools. So maybe you're doing bookkeeping and accounting for your customers, or banking. You may want to provide payroll for them as well. So Wave, for example, is a customer of ours. They're an H&R Block subsidiary, and it's basically bookkeeping, accounting for small businesses, and it's another great use case for Check.
For sure. I wonder. So, like, since I would assume the home base were your first customer, or like, how do you think about the expansion, or like, I mean, for the client acquisition, like, what were some like thoughts behind it? Like, as you mentioned about the H&R Block subsidiary company, like, how do you calculate like which type of company that would fit into your profit margin, or like so like how do you think about the financial side of things, or like business side of things when it comes to
the most important thing to understand is that our business model is usage based. So as our customers grow their payroll businesses, they our revenue relationship with them grows as well. What that means is our single most important growth engine is actually not new partners. Our single most important growth engine is growing with our current partners as their payroll businesses expand. So that's the first thing. You obviously have to get pricing, right within that, but that's usually a fairly straightforward negotiation. And then beyond that, you are obviously constantly trying to add new partners as well, which really just comes down to, are they serious about payroll? Do they really have this pain point? And if so, like Check is the original, like we created the embedded payroll space, we're the original innovators there, by far the largest player. And so if you have the pain point, usually it makes sense for us to work together.
How, I guess, like, what's the difference between embedded payroll versus payroll? Is that just like it's behind the scene, or how do you define embedded payroll?
Embedded payroll, sometimes I think the better term is just payroll infrastructure.
Right.
It's just one level deeper in the stack. So our 75 partners, they are all building payroll products that they offer. We're just the infrastructure behind them.
But this is not white labeling. You're not building the entire thing.
Correct.
Just what goes into the infrastructure
in terms of what we provide there?
I know you mentioned about like separating your payroll to like pay taxes and all these kind of different things. Can you take us behind the scene? What goes into
let me break down the core parts of the architecture.
Right.
Just logically speaking, the core things you have to do are you need to know how to onboard employees. Like, what is every state tax form? What information do you need to collect? How do you geocode the address of every employee into the right tax jurisdiction? So onboarding is part number one. Calculating payroll is part number two. So this is given all the employees, all the places they work, all their tax elections, all their benefits and their deductions and their child support garnishments, all of that. Like, how much tax should be withheld on this payroll? How much is the net pay supposed to be to the employees? It's literally a calculation engine. So that's the second piece. The third part is money movement. That's what it sounds like. How do you debit the money from the company and send it on to the employees, as well as onto all the various tax jurisdictions that you're sending those funds to as well.
I have a question. So how does the money flow? So let's say like so like I pay my small business vendor, or I don't know if you guys work with Upwork, or like what do you guys work with? Thera, or
so Thera is a customer of ours actually.
Thera is our technically our Okay, I should not say this on the show, but
No.
like yeah. So yeah. Anyway, so I wonder I how do you think about, let's say for example like a Thera or
Yeah.
something. Let's say I pay my employee through Thera.
Yep.
And then what will happen?
Yeah. So the way the money flows in that case
Mhm.
is that the bank account for the
Mhm.
customer, so in this case you,
Mhm.
would be on file with check.
Mhm.
We'll debit those funds out of your bank account.
Mhm.
We will send those funds to your employee,
Mhm.
and then we'll send the remainder of those funds on to, where do you living in? Remind me.
The Bay Area.
Bay Area. So then we'll
Yeah.
send them to the state of California, wherever the
Mhm.
taxes are owed, or if your employee's working in a different state, let's say they work in New
Mhm.
York where I live, like we'd remit them to New York,
Mhm.
that sort of thing. But the funds flow through check is like the key point.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. And then after, so like, how do you separate based off each different area? Is that like, so you have like a calculation, lines of code?
Exactly. Yeah. You could think
Okay.
internally, like we run a monolith, but it's a service-based monolith.
Mhm.
So effectively internally, we have, an
Mhm.
onboarding app, we have a calculation app, we have a money movement and payments app. We
Mhm.
have the last piece related to mention earlier is our tax filing system as
Mhm.
well. That's probably the most complex part of the whole thing.
Yeah. What's the
where we
difference
do-
between money movement and tax?
So money movement includes debiting from companies, remitting to employees, and remitting the funds to the states and whatnot. Tax filing though is not
Mhm.
about money movement; it's about reporting. So the
Oh,
actual
okay.
forms. So think about you filing your taxes
Yeah,
every year.
yeah.
You also as a business have to file your taxes.
Yeah.
The forms that you file as a business, some of those come from your payroll company,
Mm.
and your payroll company has to submit those in many cases every
Mhm.
quarter
Mhm.
to the various jurisdictions. So we do that part as well.
Got it.
Yeah, the space is honestly mind-numbingly complicated. Those are like the four most basic building blocks. There's all sorts of other junk. Like we report every new hire to the government so that they know that they shouldn't be on unemployment anymore.
Mhm.
We remit child support payments to very specific, jurisdictions in each state so that they get child support. There's a whole bunch of different stuff. It's
Mhm.
all of that we abstract away from our customers so that they don't have to deal with it.
I wonder, so like to
Yeah.
solve this kind of problem, like what was the early days kind of look like for you?
Yeah.
How do you even discover like the behind the scenes slash how the infrastructure work?
Yeah.
I know that people always say chat with like 300 customers or something, but like I feel like the customer would not know how to solve this problem though. Like I think they would know the problem, which is they don't want to do this.
100%. Yeah. It was a lot of learning and a lot of sort of recursive question, asking and answering. So, one of our favorite ways of working at Check is working backwards. So it is, okay, what is the customer problem? And then how do we work backwards to solve that? So in this case, we had that, which was Homebase needs to launch payroll. They want to do it very simply. And they don't want to, own the complex pieces. Okay, we need to do that. So then you start asking yourself, okay, what are the fundamental things that we need to do? So you can pretty quickly arrive at the four things that I just explained to you. But once you know those four things, actually executing on them and being able to handle them is a whole different story. And so what we did was, I think there were really three things we did that enabled us to be successful there. First and foremost, we knew what we didn't know and we relied on experts. So, our very first hire was a payroll expert who had been in the space his whole career and knew the rules and regulations cold, so that, we were comfortable with them as we built. You needed that expertise. Second was we said we are going to feel all of this pain. So I manually ran our payroll at first. Then once we built a part of the system, we'd run it on that system. But we dog fooded is the point. And then finally we went state by state. Payroll is very much something that you can't just do. It's not the same everywhere. You have to kind of expand gradually. And so it was basically a 3-year long period for us to go, maybe a little more than that, actually 3.5, to go from starting the business to being to supporting the entire country. And so it was just that kind of consistent. Okay, we've done New York, we've done California, we've done Texas, we've done Florida. Cool. Okay, let's go tackle Indiana and Ohio and Kentucky and these more complex ones from there.
I wonder, so like since you mentioned about you guys hire like an expert before, and how do you think about hiring and growing the team?
Yeah. The further, so we're about 6 years.
We forgot to chat about AI. I need to make sure that
we are at the AI conference.
Exactly.
I guess we should do that. We can cover AI in a minute, but But yeah, so Check's about 6 years old.
Mhm.
And the further along you get, the more I appreciate that the team is everything.
Mhm.
And maybe this will be a segue to AI too. And that I think increasingly we realize that um, the best people, the highest quality people, are the
Mhm.
ones that know how to use the tools available to them
Mhm.
too. And so I think as AI makes all of us more and more
Mhm.
productive, it actually makes hiring the best people that much more important, because
Mhm.
basically the productivity gap between the best people and maybe kind of the median person,
Mhm.
I think is actually growing as a
Mhm.
result of all of these tools coming online. So
Mhm.
for us, at the end of the day, it comes back to values. Like, do
Mhm.
you meet the core values of the company?
Mhm.
Do you want to like embrace the partnership model that we have
Mhm.
with our customers?
Mhm.
Do you want to be part of a mid-stage growing startup?
Mhm.
Do you want to work in a space that's like, payroll is not sexy, right? Like, do you want to do the like back end plumbing work
Mhm.
that frankly people also usually don't notice? Like, we get yelled at if something goes wrong. You don't get thank yous
Mhm.
if it goes well. Like, it's like a utility, like the electric
Mhm.
company or the water company.
Mhm.
And for some people that is amazing. Like we pay hundreds of thousands of people every
Mhm.
month,
Mhm.
and I get really excited thinking about, like, okay, you're putting food on the table
Mhm.
and helping people get to work and put gas in their cars. Like, that's
Mhm.
really exciting for me. But for some people, it's not. There's plenty of
Mhm.
things to go do in the world. We really try and
Mhm.
help hone in on the folks who like love our mission and are excited to be part of, like, a small group that's going to work really hard towards it.
I wonder, speaking of team AI, like, so right now, are you guys leveraging any coding copilot, or like what's the thought behind, I guess, like leveraging AI to improve the efficiency, whether from your functioning on your company,
Yeah.
also like in, like, I guess, like put it into the product.
Yeah, so I think all of the above is
Mhm.
basically the answer. Like, we're very much trying it, across the whole business, and I
Mhm.
think you kind of have to be crazy not to,
Mhm.
at this point. And maybe 2 years ago that wasn't true, but
Mhm.
I don't think it's a question, at this
Mhm.
point, that the tools are pretty amazing. So yeah, we've done speeding up development and
Mhm.
increasing the quality of development was definitely the first application internally
Mhm.
at Check. Copilot was the kind of initial thing we did. Increasingly, our team uses Cursor extensively.
Mhm.
I've been really, as a sort of half PM, half engineer by background, I've been really excited by how we've been able to enable more of our product team
Mhm.
to actually better understand our product and our code base
Mhm.
using tools like Cursor, where they can go and chat directly with the code base and ask it questions, and just like cut our engineers out of the loop for some of the more
Mhm.
basic things. And increasingly, we're trying to enable some of these folks who are, maybe semi-technical but not really
Mhm.
engineers, to at least write initial, kind of code set changes as well,
Mhm.
using new agent-oriented tools, mostly in Cursor as well, where you really in just English type out what the
Mhm.
feature is, and it goes and builds it. So,
Do you
yeah,
think it's actually really good quality of codes, or like do you feel like it's kind of like it's still at the beginning phase of like everybody's like trying stuff, versus like actually feel like the efficiency significantly improves
I
like
think
right
you
away?
look. It depends what you're doing. If you're doing
Right.
like a personal project or you're trying to prototype something,
Mhm.
it's more than sufficient. Like
Mhm.
what you used to pay Squarespace, hundreds of dollars a month or whatever to maintain your
Mhm.
website. Like, there's just no need for that. Like, you can do that
Yeah.
super simply with these tools. In a space like ours that is regulated, where you're dealing with money, where like
Yeah.
correctness is really
Yeah. Yeah.
crucial,
Yeah.
code review is critical. Like, you're not
Mhm.
going to auto generate code and just ship it. Like, you need
Mhm.
human eyes on it. You need to make sure you understand what you've
Mhm.
actually written. So, I don't really work on our critical systems anymore. But like this
Mhm.
weekend, there was like an internal tool we had,
Mhm.
and I used a Cursor agent to help me, write a small little
Mhm.
change to that. That definitely, it wasn't huge. It would have taken me 2 hours. Otherwise, it took me 10 minutes. As
Mhm.
a result of using AI. So, I think we're still like in the grand scheme of things in the
Mhm.
early days, but maybe 2 years ago was the top of the first inning. Now we're at
Mhm.
the bottom of the first inning, and the tool's perfect.
Mhm.
No, are we at AGI? No, but
Mhm.
are they getting so much better? Every quarter,
Mhm.
yes, and they're frankly already pretty damn powerful.
Mm.
Yeah.
Um, I wonder, so like since like I guess like when you first starting ensemble the team, you mentioned about the first hire was someone who was like knows the space code, and like, and I think like I wonder, did you start the same company with the same co-founders, or was it like a completely new crew. And then do you feel like the space or domain expertise knowledge is like important for tackling a space like this versus I feel like a lot of the founders, like typically they have their own like unique experience. Let's say, I don't know, like a dentist started like a
Totally.
dentist AI company,
Yeah.
versus like like legal company or whatever. Like people have their own domain knowledge. Do you feel like the domain knowledge slash earn insight is like important?
Yeah, it's a
Or
great question. So first of all, Check was very much a get the band back
Mhm.
together type of
Mhm.
thing. So I started with two co-founders, both of whom I worked with at Oyster.
Mhm.
One of our first two team members also worked for two of our first three or four actually,
Mhm.
worked with us at Oyster too. Yeah, on the domain expertise front, and shout out Jim. I'm sure he'll watch this later. 6 years later, he's still with us and crushing every day. Look, I think the reality is, and I've done this twice now and have plenty of
Mhm.
friends that have done it. Like there is no
Mhm.
one right or wrong way to build a startup.
Mhm.
You can have deep domain expertise
Mhm.
before you come in. You can hire domain expertise. You can not have either and say, actually, the whole industry is wrong and I'm going to go
Mhm.
do it from first principles and just figure it out myself. And
Mhm.
like the reality is, you need to have sort of a mix of all of those skills and
Mhm.
experiences, I think, to be successful. And it's just a matter of how much of one you have,
Mhm.
versus the other.
Mhm.
Um, but I guess what I'd say to other founders is like, be thoughtful about, does the business you're starting fit your
Mhm.
experience and your skill set? But that doesn't mean, you have to check every
Mhm.
conceivable box. At the end of the day, like, just go build.
Mm. I wonder when you're thinking about fundraising. So, like, as a second time founder, was it just significantly easier, or since you are building in two different domains, maybe that's like a different fundraising
Yeah,
um, vibe?
I could have
Or
seen it
yeah.
go different ways, but no, the reality is it was dramatically easier.
Mhm.
I think both we'd established a track record of
Mhm.
success in just the venture
Mhm.
community broadly.
Yeah.
So I think our reputation made it easier.
Mhm.
Frankly, I was also just better at running the business and knew more about how to do it. So I think the
Mhm.
business looked better. So yeah, I think as a result of those factors, especially
Mhm.
those early rounds,
Mhm.
were so
Would you
much
say
better.
you were more focused on the revenue versus company, or like versus like products, or how is the second time different from the first time?
In terms of how I've run the business,
Mhm.
it's a good question. I would say, like, when we were conceiving of the business,
Mhm.
I was much more focused on, yeah, basically the sort of the business model and our position in the
Mhm.
ecosystem and how we were going to maintain
Mhm.
differentiation and things like that. Whereas the first time around, all I cared about was product. I was like, can we ship the product experience? I
Mhm.
didn't worry that much about distribution and
Mhm.
market power and
Mhm.
things like that. So yeah, that was part of the original conception of it.
Mhm.
As we moved on, like day to day, it's just about execution. Like, are
Mhm.
you listening to customers? Are you pounding the pavement to get more of them? Like, are you shipping the
Mhm.
right features and shipping them fast enough? And I think that was actually pretty consistent across
Mhm.
both companies. But I think we got the pick right in terms of
Mhm.
the idea this time around,
Mhm.
whereas that was less true the
Oh,
first time.
I have a question. So, like, do you feel like it's I mean, obviously, this is a super old school slash cringe topic, but like, so do you feel like the market is more important or the team is more important?
Yeah. Look, like anything, you got to have both.
Mhm.
I think, the people who tell you the team is more important
Mhm.
usually say that from a good team will basically figure out how to pivot out of a bad market into a
Mhm.
good one, which to me is sort of like saying at the end of the day, you have to have the right market. And it's just a matter of like, can you get there? So I
Mhm.
guess what I would say is like, you must have a good market. Like no
Mhm.
team can overcome a bad market.
Mhm.
Now, maybe a good team can switch markets, but at the end
Mhm.
of the day, like you got to have the market.
Mhm.
And then from there, it becomes the team. But like,
Mhm.
when I think about how much time I spend on that, the market was like, I don't know, 0.1% of like the total time I've spent on Check in terms of picking it. And like the team and the execution is,
How do you
99.9%.
convince yourself about solving this problem? This problem is not something that I personally am very passionate about. I
Yeah.
mean, no offense. I'm glad that you exist, but
You
the
would
problem
be
is like,
pretty weird if that was
yeah.
something that I think I've met like 3 people in the last 6 years that said like, yes, I truly
Like,
am
are they all
already
your
really passionate.
co-founders now?
Yeah, basically they certainly all, work with us, either that or work, with our partners basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I think it comes back to like who you are and what kind of problems you like. I've always really enjoyed. So again, I come from South Carolina. Like I grew up in sort of a family of like small businesses and local businesses and things like that. And I like solving problems for those people, and I want everyone to have high quality software. And you look back, as a technologist, like the trend of the last like 70 years has been just an absolute explosion in the amount of software that's being built, and AI is inflecting that even more upwards. And I felt like the HR and payroll tools were being left behind. You weren't able to build new tools in this space at the same rate that you could build tools elsewhere because of all the complexity. And I hated that. Like that's just was so clear to me that was not the way the future needed to work. Like business owners needed to have better, easier tools, and developers needed to be empowered to build those. And so I got really excited to do that. It was, building for developers that I could relate to, for end users that I could relate to. My parents are both labor and employment lawyers, so I didn't know all the rules, but like I kind of knew the lingo, and like it felt familiar to me. And so all of that, I don't know, I'm weird. It added up for me in a way that I'm like, this gets me excited,
No comments. I wonder, so when you're thinking about, I guess like, one thing is like, I think like when you're picking the investors, so some of our listeners are investors, and I wonder like, how do they get into a company like yours? So because you're a second-time founder, I'm sure there's like VC chasing you and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And how do you think about like picking the investor that are like not the brand names? Or I mean, you guys have some brand names investors, so I don't want to just like.
No, yeah, I mean we've got the gamut. We have amazing investors like Thrive and Stripe and Index and Bedrock and many others, as well as smaller angels and whatnot as well. Look, I'll say a few things. There's no substitute for prior relationships. So I do think just building your network of high quality people is best.
I have a question on that. So like by building relationships, like what does that mean? You just like see them all the time, say hi, or like every once a year you send happy birthday. Like what does that mean for like relationship building?
I think it has to be genuine at the end of the day. Like as a founder, you're so busy, and like it's just so easy to see through the BS. So like in my case, my co-founder from Oyster started a venture firm. So like, we spent 10 years building companies together. Like, of course we were going to work together again, and he was going to lead my rounds, like we're in each other's weddings, like that kind of deal. That's like the far end of the spectrum in terms of it. But like, there are other levels as well. So I think that's kind of like one thing is build the relationship. I think beyond that though, like the reality is investors have very short attention spans, most of them. Like no offense, but it's just true. They're constantly chasing the new hot AI deal or whatever. And most of them are generalists, which means they're not going super deep on any one thing. And so like it's a super herd mentality. And so the point being, if you want to stand out to a company and to a founder, like pay attention to them, like do the work. Understand the business, like actually show that you can be helpful in some way, shape, or form.
So there's always a meme that's just like an investor that made one intro and then be like, so glad I can be helpful or something. So like,
and it's usually like kind of a useless intro, or they're like, let me know if I can make any intros. Glad I could help, and that's all they do. Like it's so true.
So when I mean, like, what are some actual useful stuff that like investor
early days hiring,
like
here's someone I know is on the market, they're a great engineer, you should talk to them. It's incredible. Like those are some of the most helpful intros I've ever received. Customers are the other one, like especially if you're in a market where you're looking for a specific customer type, like a real, I know this person, they trust me, they'll take a meeting with you, like you should go talk to them. Incredibly helpful. Connections to the right other investors can be really helpful as well. I think those are probably the three biggest ones. And then less commonly, I'd say general industry knowledge, advice, is also helpful as well.
What about like domain expertise investors? Like, do they have to be like, let's say a fintech expert, or like, what are something that like, for example, think about your early days, like the angels or like whoever that you took on. Like, I guess like, how do you think about putting together your board of advisors, or like who would be, not who particularly, but like how can like a small fund that kind of like win? You mentioned about like hearing about your problems and I try to solve them. But like obviously I don't think the investors are the best recruiters. I think recruiters are the best recruiters.
Actually, I think I disagree with that.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
I mean, look, okay, if you're trying to do it at scale,
Yeah.
sure. But in the early days, like you're not doing it at scale. You need like
Okay.
2 people. You don't have a recruiter.
Yeah.
You don't have the money to hire a recruiter. Like yes, you have your network and you're trying to do it, but investors often, they're pretty good at knowing networks of people who like want to do really early stage companies. And maybe
Yeah.
they know the person who like
It's
a
very
pretty good
rare.
fit, but like anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
I think for the right person, they can be really helpful there.
Okay.
But yeah, at the end of the day, I think you want to mix and
Mhm.
you also want to know your skill sets. Like for me as an engineer, I didn't need like, super technical investors that I could like go get advice on building from.
Mhm.
Domain expertise was helpful. Yeah, but it depended. Yeah.
I wonder. So when you were, I guess, at the beginning, when you were not like as a CEO, like how do you really spend your time these days? And I feel like it's really hard to like, not go to like build some stuff. Maybe this is a me problem. Like,
Yeah.
but I feel like whenever you like outsource to somewhere else, or like you like not outsource, but like delegate the stuff to someone else, it's always like you have to manage it because you have to set milestone, you have to make sure stuff works, and then you have to actually listen to people, make sure crazy stuff don't happen.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you have to do the investor calls. Like everybody's always fundraising or always closing customers.
Yep.
And then you have like I guess you have goals for like we're gonna close X amount of clients, but like what if it doesn't really like get close to wherever that is? Like how do you think about those different milestones from the early days to like now as a later stage company?
First of all, just from a time management perspective, the way I think about it is, and almost regardless of stage, I think this holds, but it's even more true as you get bigger. Something like 60 or 70% of your time is probably going to be taken up by just all the day-to-day stuff, hiring, closing customers, customer escalations, board meetings, fundraising, etc. That's just the nature of the job. Then the real question is, what do you do with the other 30%? And for that, for me, it's really about either what's on fire, like is there something that we need to be good at that we're just not, or what's the new capability that I want to build in the business? Like what thing that we can go and do now. Stage, and are you on track for that? And if you're not, you gotta adjust. Bring in new people, change strategies, whatever it might be to help you reach that next goal.
For sure. Yeah. Speaking of next goal, what's next for your company? That would be my last question, and then we'll do a 30-second fire round.
That sounds great. I think let's end on AI, especially being here at HumanX. Like one of the things that I'm most excited about is again, like our whole mission is to make paying people simple, and to do that by making really this financial service of payroll more accessible to software developers and ultimately to small and medium-sized business owners. So what I'm really excited about is AI makes it so much easier. It makes it so much easier for our customers to go and build new software. It makes it so much easier for small businesses to understand what the heck is going on with their payroll and their taxes and these things. So I think that to me, when I look at the way payroll worked, 5 years ago, much less 10, and how I think it's going to work 5 years from now, I just think the rate of progress is increasing so rapidly. It's got us really excited, and we're pumped to ship even more, to put more tools in the hands of our partners to go solve that problem.
Amazing. Okay, so 1 minute fire round. So what's your favorite book?
Favorite book is I'm going old school YA, which is The Giver.
Who would you invite to a dinner party?
Big Duke basketball fans these days. I gotta go John Shire. I think what he's done his first 3 years is amazing.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
I think it's my peers. So, I'll call out my co-founders of my companies, Eric and Willem with my first company, and now Eric and Vivek, here at Check. I think I've maybe never had like a mentor per se, but I've had these amazing peers who've lifted me up over time, and who've been able to do such awesome things together.
I have a piggyback question on that. So like, is the co-founder have to be your best friends, or like, do you view it as like a work relationship that like, you have to just like work together complementarily?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think everyone has different interpersonal relationships. So I'd say like there's no one right or wrong way to do it. Like for me, it's almost hard to like disentangle the two concepts. Like work is my life in so many ways. And my co-founder, I'm working with you all the time. So of course you're going to be one of my closest friends, but like it also stems from work. So I think honestly, when done best, they kind of merge. And yeah, that's how I do it anyway.
Where can we find you outside of work?
I love being outside. So in the mountains, skiing, hiking, things like that. Yeah.
You're not even a Bay Area person. I feel like that's a Bay Area standard answer.
What, sir?
I feel like the hiking.
Bay Area. Yeah, that's true. It's true. I know. I shouldn't live in New York. Talk to my wife. She's born and raised New Yorker, so I'm not going anywhere. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Chris, for having me. It was fun.
Fun conversation. Okay, let me just quickly on stream.